Hi, I'm Jeannie, and it's time to wake up. If you have not become a Christian yet, it's time. It's time to come to God. I know that He's been speaking to you in your life. He wants you to see the parts of your life that are going wrong, and He wants to turn you right round to follow the path that He has placed before you. I'm going to put a prayer below that you can look at, and you can use it as a guideline to pray if you're not sure how to pray. When I became a Christian, I just prayed. I didn't have any kind of guidelines. I just prayed. And it was an immediate and miraculous transformation for me. But for other people, it's not always immediate and it's not always miraculous. For some people, it's a slow turning. It's a slow learning process as they begin to trust God with their problems and begin to trust that God can actually give them the strength to get through the problems that they're having or the difficulties that they're having in their lives. So whichever it takes you, whether hopefully it'll be like mine and it'll be an immediate transformation, or if not, just hang in there, because some people are like the back burner, slow simmering, constantly cooking. It takes you a little bit of time to understand and fully embrace what God has for you. So hang in there and trust that God wants the best for you. All right, we are going to be continuing our studies on Matthew. Last time we had a bunch of little parables that Jesus was telling us, and some of them were kind of complicated. But now we're in Matthew 14, and we're starting with, unfortunately, the death of John the Baptist. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard reports of Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. And because of this, miraculous powers are at work in him." For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had repeatedly told him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Although Herod wanted to kill John, he feared the crowd because they accepted John as a prophet. But on Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod, so much that he promised with an oath to give her what she asked. Instructed by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." Although it grieved the king because of his oath and dinner guests, he commanded it to be given. So he sent and had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. Then John's disciples came and took the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. All right, so this Herod, this isn't the same King Herod that had all the babies slaughtered. That was his father. Nice bunch of people, right? So this is one of the sons, Herod. And then there were two other sons, Philip I and Philip II. So this was Herod Antipas. And he had taken his brother's wife as his wife. The daughter was not his daughter. The daughter was actually his niece, who would have been about 12 to 14 years old at the time. So Herod had captured John the Baptist because John kept telling him, "This isn't right." Now, if you remember, the Herods had come into the Jewish faith, not by birth, but because there were what they called foreigners who came into the faith and went through rituals and became Jewish along with the regular born Jews. And King Herod had become the king and had become Jewish based on that desire. I don't know why he wanted to become Jewish, because he certainly didn't act Jewish. And if you remember the stories that I told you about him, how he killed a priest playing water polo or something like that. He was a very sick and violent man. Well, his children are about the same. But So Herod Antipas is a Jewish leader. And just a little background too, he's not the king because the Romans are in charge. He's more like a governor, even though many places they refer to him to this Herod Antipas as king. He's not king. He's just like a governor or a mayor of the area. So he's expected to keep control in his little area. And in this case, it's where the Jewish people are, the Jewish community. So anyway, he was very tired of hearing John preach that he was wrong and about marrying his brother's wife. So he went ahead and captured him. But now apparently he was having some kind of big party, and Herodias really hated John and wanted him dead. So when Herod Antipas asked the niece to dance, it was for the sake of the whole group and crowd. And since he was so pleased, he said, whatever you want, you can have. And that's when she asked for the head of John the Baptist. Now, there's a story. The story is kind of similar if you look at this with King Ahab and Jezebel from the Old Testament. I believe that it was in First Kings. I'll look that up. Put it right here. Queen Jezebel hated Elijah so badly that he wanted to put him to death. And she even sent him a note saying, you're going to die. I'm going to put you to death. And Queen Jezebel manipulated King Ahab to try to kill Elijah. But we know that they were not successful because Elijah was actually taken up in a chariot of fire to heaven. It's very similar because here's the same thing. You've got Herodes, who's kind of manipulating the king or the mayor, the governor guy, and she's successful this time. Even though Jezebel wasn't successful, Herodias is successful, and she gets her daughter to have the king decapitate him and bring his head onto a platter. Now the king, or saying king, Herod, was so manipulated by so many people. So he's manipulated by his wife. He's being manipulated by the dancing girl. He was manipulated by the crowds because, as you read, he wouldn't put John to death because he knew that the crowds accepted John as a prophet, and he was afraid that the people would rise up against him. So he didn't want to have him put to death because of that reason. But then he was also worried about what the people at the feast that he was having, the party that he was having, were going to think about him, because he did make a public oath several times, not just once, but several times. Whatever you want, I'll do it, whatever you want. So he felt compelled to follow through with having John the Baptist beheaded. And it says he was very grieved to do this. So it doesn't really explain to us why he was grieved. Was he grieved because he thought that the people were going to rise up against him? Was he grieved because he knew he was killing a prophet of God and that was going to come with some severe consequences? But we don't know. Nonetheless, Jesus gets news of this because after John's apostles come and take his body and bury it, they go and tell John. And now these men will now start following Jesus around. They won't be one of the 12 apostles, but they are still going to be the remnant of the group of people that follow him and the 12 apostles around. And so they get a lot of the same teachings that the 12 apostles did get as well. All right, so let's look at the next section. Now, when Jesus heard this, he went away from there privately in a boat to an isolated place. But when the crowd heard about it, they followed him on foot from the towns. As he got out, he saw the large crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed the sick. When evening arrived, his disciples came to him saying, "This is an isolated place, and the hour is already late. Send the crowds away so that they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But he replied, "They don't need to go. You give them something to eat." They said to him, We only have 5 loaves and 2 fish. Bring them here to me, he replied. Then he instructed the crowds to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up into heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. He gave them to the disciples, who in turn gave them to the crowds. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up the broken pieces left over, 12 baskets full. Not counting women and children, there were about 5,000 men who ate. So this is the first of 2 miracles that Jesus is going to perform. Tides are changing here. Tides are beginning to change for Jesus. And he has been rejected by the priests, the Pharisees, and some of the scribes and such. He's been rejected by them. He's been rejected by some of the people as well. Some people who are just refusing to believe the words that he's saying, that he is the Messiah. And so now his focus is going to be turned towards the disciples more, because up to now they've been learning and they've been seeing him doing miracles and such. But he needs some things to edify them, so much so that when he is taken from the Garden of Gethsemane, the apostles will be able to have the strength to get through that ordeal. And then after his death and before his resurrection, they'll be able to come together and support each other. But he needs to get them strong right now in what is happening and understanding the Word of God better and clearer. If you notice, he comes into this town. He's trying to find a place to be alone so that, well, it doesn't really say that he's going to grieve for John, but we kind of assume he's going to grieve for John. But then again, he may be going to another place to sing praises to God, because John is now in heaven and Jesus knows that. So he may be singing praises. But we know that Jesus did often leave the group of people to go pray. Anyhow, when he went to this place, they ran around and they met him there, and he had compassion on them and he started healing them. Now the Jewish people have their end of day. The end of their day and the beginning of a new day is at nightfall, when it becomes night. So this was already becoming in the afternoon, and that meant that the evening was coming quickly. And so the apostles were like, send them out, let them go get something to eat so that they can be in their homes before nightfall. But Jesus said, no, we're going to feed them. And the apostles said, what? We only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. We can't feed all these people. But Jesus said, bring them to me. Come on. So he brought them to him. And the first thing Jesus did was give thanks, which is a typical thing at a Jewish table before they eat. The father of the family will give thanks to God before they all eat their meal. And so Jesus was doing the typical Jewish thing, giving thanks. And then when he broke up the bread and started tearing apart the fish, put them into baskets, the 12 disciples went around and started handing out this food to people. And people ate until they were satisfied. This wasn't just a brunch where it's like, well, not even a brunch. This wasn't just like hors d'oeuvres where it's a little bit just to satisfy you until you have time to eat your dinner. This was a full-fledged dinner. It filled them up, and they still had 12 baskets left over. That's a lot. They said that they fed at least, 5,000 men. So 5,000 men, if there's plus women and children, that might have been even close to 10,000 people for all we know. We don't know. It doesn't tell us that, but most of the Jewish people, if they had a wife, they had more than one child, so they'd had 3 or 4 children at least. Some of them had a lot more than that. And so there were like, I would say between 8 and 10,000. That's just my guess. I don't have anything to base that on other than the number of 5,000 men. So that was the major miracle that Jesus performed. Now that miracle that Jesus performed was predicted in Psalm 132 in verse 15, speaking about Zion. In verse 15 it says, I will abundantly supply what she needs. I will give her poor all the food they need. And that's talking about Zion, which is another name for Jerusalem or the Israelites. or the Hebrew nation. So that was a prediction that was made. Also, Elisha, not Elijah, but the other one that came right after him, Elisha, also fed a whole bunch of people with a few loaves of bread. A man brought some food for the prophet Elisha. It was 20 loaves of bread and some fresh fruits of barley harvest, as well as ears of grain. And Elisha said for him to give it to the men so that they could eat. There were over 100 men there. He said, set it before the people so that they may eat. And the guy was like, what? I can't, how can I feed 100 men with just these? And he replied, just set it before the people so they may eat, for this is what the Lord has said. They will eat and have some left over. So the guy sets the loaves of bread before these 100 men, and they ate and they had some left over, just as in the Lord's message. Now keep this miracle in mind of Jesus feeding the 5,000, because in the next chapter you're going to see him doing something very similar with a different group of people. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dispersed the crowds. And after he sent the crowds away, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat, already far from land, was taking a beating from the waves because the wind was against it. As the night was ending, Jesus came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified and said, it's a ghost, and cried out with fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them. Have courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. Peter said to him, Lord, if it is you, order me to come to you on the water. So he said, come. Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind, he became afraid and he started to sink. He cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? When they went up to the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. After they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. When the people there recognized him, they sent word into all the surrounding area, and they brought all their sick to him. They begged if they could only touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. So this is the second time that we see Jesus in a boat with his disciples in a storm. The first time, the storm was wailing all around them, and he stopped the storm. And that was kind of like a chastising that their belief systems, their belief wasn't where it needed to be. So he was kind of like chastising them. But in this case, he's purifying them. Now they believe who he is. They know who he is. And when he came walking across the water, of course it scared them. I think it would scare anyone to see someone walking across the water like that. But Jesus says, don't be afraid. And Peter says, well, hey, if it's really you, Jesus, call me out there. And he did. And Peter's walking on the water. But then as he starts looking around and seeing the world around him, the storms, he starts to sink. And he yells out, Jesus, save me. Which, of course, Jesus does. He reaches out his hand and he says, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? Why? And that's a good question we need to ask ourselves, because I think that even in today's times, we doubt so much what Jesus and what God can do for us. So that's a good lesson to learn there. But it solidified for the apostles that Jesus was indeed the Messiah and that Jesus was indeed God. As they got to the place of Gennesaret and the people recognized Jesus, they started, coming, and they're like, can't we just touch his cloak and we can be healed? Which, if you remember, that happened to the lady who had the bleeding, where she didn't want to bother Jesus, so she just goes up behind him and touches his cloak and is immediately healed. So all these people are around him and they're touching him. Everybody who touched him was healed. Boom, bottom line, done. Next time we'll be looking at chapter 15. And like I said, we're going to be looking at a different group of people where Jesus does a similar miracle as well. Now it's time for current events. Our current event this time is birds again. In Mexico, several yellow-headed blackbirds fell from the sky. You can see the video from Jason A. on YouTube. These birds just fell out of the sky. Some of them were able to get up and fly again, others were not, and were dead on the street. But this is not an isolated incident. In Pembrokeshire, Wales, several starlings were found dead that had just fallen out of the sky. It was reported that many people thought they were already dead before they fell out of the sky. In India, they found several cattle egrets dead, hundreds of cattle egrets dead. In Radford, Virginia, it was robins, hundreds of robins falling out of the sky already dead. One person was hit in the head by a falling robin. A police car was hit by one of the dead falling robins. In St. Louis, several dozens of crows have wound up dead. Nobody really knows why. In Louisiana, they found over 500 red-winged blackbirds and starlings dead. And in Arkansas, over 5,000 red-winged blackbirds were found dead near Beebe, Arkansas. Back in India, in Delhi, they have had over 1,200 birth deaths before January 20th of this year. What's going on? What is going on? Scientists have said so many things, it almost sounds ludicrous. One explanation is avian flu. Another one is COVID-19. And one last reason was that all of these birds somehow collided with something in the sky, and that is why they are dead. Scientists are not really helping us out with this one. Time to wake up. Something's going on. Something is going on, and we need to wake up and look around the world and see what is happening. And please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Thank you.